Hi all, I'm Giovanni Santamaria, Associate Professor and Department Chair at the School of Architecture and Design at the New York Institute of Technology. And on behalf of our Dean, Maria Perbellini, I would like to thank and welcome our guest lecturers today, our students, faculty, alumni, and friends attending this event. Architecture Behind Buildings brings together the authors of Tiki-Taka Publication's first 4 issues, Jinhong Jeon Yunhee and Yunhee Choi, Principal at Bureau of Architecture, Research and Environment, Bayer, Dongwoo Yim, Principal at PRAUD and Assistant Professor at Hongik University, and Roon Kang, Assistant Professor at the New School Parsons School of Design and Principal of Math Practice, and Dongsei Kim, our Assistant Professor at the New York Institute of Technology at the School of Architecture and Design and founder of the AXU Studio. Our guests will discuss how emerging global and local issues can be explored, questions, reframed, and potentially addressed through the unique lens of architecture and design. The participants will also share how they experience the globally distributed multidisciplinary collaborative conversation between architects, designers, teachers, and researchers, given the pandemic and the physical distance and time differences of this last period. This is the final event, part of our Spring 2022 lecture and event series titled Communities in the School of Architecture and Design of New York Tech. Thanking again our guests and our faculty and staff who organized this event, our chair of the Lecture and Event Committee, Professor Alessandro Meris, and our Assistant Professor Dongsei Kim for organizing this event. I will now leave the stage to Professor Kim for a brief introduction of our guest. Thank you and enjoy.
Great, thank you very much, Professor Giovanni Santamaria, for your kind introduction. I will start by sharing my screen here. So thank you again for the introduction. Good Tuesday evening to New Yorkers, good afternoon to Hawaii, and a good early Thursday morning, 7 a.m. in Seoul. First, I would like to thank Alessandro, Susan, Marcella, and the Lecture and Events Committee for making this event possible. And to the participants, the publisher, and the other audiences from our school, community, and outside the community joining us today. I'm Dongsei Kim, Assistant Professor at NYIT, who organized today's conversation. I will introduce today's presenters and moderate our discussion at the end. So Tiki-Taka refers to a Spanish football playing style characterized by short passing, movement, and working the ball through various channels and maintaining possession. In our case, it is used to describe the act of passing ideas off one another in an informal way to test and further refine emerging ideas and thoughts through a series of conversations. And most importantly, to collaborate and support each other's work. As you may have noticed, today's presenters are in 3 different countries and time zones, New York, Hawaii, and Seoul. And I'm hoping that there are others from other regions and different time zones as well. Current pandemic conditions have made online events like this
Don't say you are muted.
Oh, sorry, can you hear me now? Current pandemic conditions have made online events like this more common. They eliminate geographical distances between people and connect collectives and individuals with similar interests around the globe. At the same time, it also starts to distort our spatial temporal experiences. This image illustrates the shrinking world according to the increasing speed of transportation. As you can see here, large to small, and the diminishing footprint of the world. So what does the speed of the internet connection mean to this diagram or drawing? to the changing ways architects, designers research, practice, and collaborate? This is one of the many compelling questions we generated through our Tiki-Taka conversations, and we'll talk more about these thought-provoking questions and the ways of working at the end of this event. In October 2020, a few months after COVID hit us, Dongwoo Yim of PRAUD, whom I have known for many years, invited me to initiate a pamphlet architecture-like publication with Bahrain that would investigate the expanded role of architects that is beyond designing buildings. So the conversation started. We met diligently every fortnight via Zoom about 40 times for the last 18 months. Today's presenters will share a summary of their publications and how Tiki-Taka conversation influenced their publication, their way of working, thinking within a 10-minute presentation. Now I will present my work within this mentioned Tiki-Taka publication framework. And this gray area here is where I'm currently located within Long Island. And this is New York City. Manhattan is here at the center. And I would like to start my presentation with this short acknowledgement of where I am. I respectfully acknowledge that I am currently located and live on the traditional lands of Matiniquot people who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. The title of my publication is Drawing Hwajang, Mapping Contested Territories for Imagination. Drawing Hwajang explores how mapping can produce knowledge that can reframe contested territories into productive spaces. This study explicitly engages Hwajang philosophy that argues for embracing opponents and working towards reconciliation through continuous conversations. This approach seeks to shift antagonisms beyond false dichotomies and binary oppositions. This publication engages my research on the Korean demilitarized zone to illustrate how Hwajang-informed mapping can produce knowledge that can reframe contentious territories as synergistic productive spaces. So here I wish to talk a little bit about what Hwajang is. Hwajang is a philosophy and a working method that Won-hyo, who was one of the leading thinkers, writers, commentators of the Korean Buddhist tradition, that was established when he attempted to address and reconcile the contradictory Buddhism in the early 7th century. According to Jeon Ho-gun, a Korean philosopher, in his book, The History of Korean Philosophy, he states that the first character, Hwa, the character is of the Hwajang, is the logic and concord or consolidation. The second character, Jang, is made up of two characters, speaking and argument, which is about arguing and debating through words. Therefore, the theory of Hwajang is about reconciling all kinds of Jang, thus reconciling arguments into a form of Hwa, consolidation through conversations and arguments that continue to have relationship to each other. At the same time, Hwajang's Hwa and Jang may be understood or seen as the opposite. The defining character of Hwajang theory is arriving at the understanding that the seemingly opposite Hwa and Jang are not different from each other, but understanding both as different ways of seeking the truth. Hwajang was one of the many approaches, philosophies that I encountered and embraced in my border research and the conditions of the Korean demilitarized zone. And for example, Richard Sennett's dialogical approach that you see at the top, which favors exchanges of ideas in an open-ended framework over producing a definitive resolution, and Chantal Mouffe's agonistic approach, which favors confronting different perspectives without the possibility of reconciling them into one deliberated form, are some of the conceptual frameworks that my work on the Korean division and borders are founded upon. So you can see the dialogical approach that is against the dialectic, agonistic model that is against the public sphere, positive peace against the negative peace by Johan Galtung here as well. Nevertheless, I was convinced that engaging the Korean Buddhist scholar Wonhyo's Hwajeng to address the Korean conflict was an appropriate step to take. Now I'd like to really sweep through the publication and take you through the book. This is the table of content of the book. The publication starts with the articulation of why I map and how Tiki-Taka, the conversations we've been having over the last year and a half, influenced this research, and a summary of my conversation with Lucas Power, who is at the University of Toronto, on the efficacy and pitfalls of mapping. This is followed by a mapping of my own self, the cosmopolitan identity of myself that informs my work. And this is one of the spreads from my publication. Then the book starts to introduce a series of maps under the title of Tracing the Korean DMZ that could be considered as a form of collecting primary materials, and selective tracing that curates existing conditions in a particular way for further analysis. This is when one starts to spatially understand the existing ground conditions through drawing and starting to take a position. The following set of maps and drawings also start to deconstruct the DMZ through multiple lenses and layers that generate platforms for imagination. More interpretive mapping projects follow these, and I will flip through the book just to illustrate some of the examples. And these maps attempts to understand how the DMZ has gone through the time and how things change over time. So these are some of the maps that privilege the change over time and the time that is associated with change. The following maps further interpret and represent the DMZ in ways and new ways, rotating sometimes and destabilizing the conventional north, such as this one that rotates the north and south relationship. Multiple meanings and ways of seeing are also generated through engaging multiple scales and associated technologies that enable them. So you can see some of these rotated maps of the DMZ and how they were exhibited, and texts that go with them, and different scales of engagement with the territory. Glimpses of how territories can also be reimagined and reframed through mapping are illustrated through a pilot mapping project here titled Productive Generations. This project proposes a place for the lost generations of separated families, or North and South Korea, to come together at a micro hydro water plant that additionally provides electricity to both North and South Korea at their intersection of the border and the border crossing the water body. So you can see the context within the planet, Northeast Asia, zooming in to the DMZ territory, mapping the waterways and how they have started to allow myself to locate the potential sites for this project. So these are the mappings that get to the productive generator and the generations project. This is a zoom in of the actual thing. And this mapping project excavates the names of the 533 places and names located within the original 1953 armistice map of the DMZ, where currently it is evacuated, empty, and mostly overlooked for the last 70 years. This one-of-a-kind preliminary mapping of the forgotten 533 places acknowledges the history of the DMZ, emphasizing what existed, who lived there before the armistice agreement, eliciting emotions, memories, and homes and homelands. This mapping challenges the dominant representation of the current DMZ, often as a tabula rasa site. Instead, the mapping raises several questions, such as who were the individuals that used to live in these places, how many were living there, how and when did they leave, where did they go, are those who have lost their homes and hometowns still alive? Has the DMZ been taken over by flora and fauna over the years? How has nature transformed these places? What happens when the DMZ becomes accessible again? So this is an example that illustrates why I map, what I map, and how I map, and what kinds of provocations, stories, and imaginations they generate for conventionally contested territories. So these are some of the zoom-ins of those 533 places located within the DMZ map that are overlooked. And the book concludes with a reflection on one of my recent publications on the topic, and an epilogue and a resource and references. So thank you very much for your attention. Now I will transition to our next presenter. And I would like to reflect on how the Tiki-Taka conversations directly contributed to this publication in our concluding discussion. So thank you very much. Okay, so our next presenters are Jinhong Jeon and Yunhee Choi of Principles of BARE, B-A-R-E. Jinhong Jeon and Yunhee Choi are the co-founding directors of BARE, Bureau of Architecture Research and Environment. BARE is an architectural studio established in 2014, committed to the exploration of architecture that responds to the dynamic environment and time through research and practice. BARE's work include the installation of a connected pavilion for imagining New Eurasia, culture at the Asia Cultural Center, and a site adaptable installation for specters of the state avant-garde at the Korean Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2018. Their latest work in pneumatic structures was acquired for the permanent collection by the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Korea. Jinhong and Yunhee are both graduates of the AA school, where they were awarded the AA school and were awarded the 5th Aramjigi Heritage Tomorrow Prize in 2015, and was selected as Young Architects Program finalists in 2016. They have taught at Korea National University of Arts from 2015 to 2001, and co-curated the Seoul exhibition at the Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism in 2021. And they have been recently appointed as the deputy directors of the inaugural exhibition for the Korean National Museum of Urban and Architecture, set to open in 2025. I really look forward to that and their presentation today, titled Moving in the City. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dongsei. I would just share the screen. Can you see it clearly?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Hello, everyone. We are Jinhong and Yunhee. We would like to thank Professor Dongsei and NIT for organizing this event, as well as everyone joining us online. We run a studio called Bureau of Architecture Research and Environment, BARE for short in Korean. BARE was architecture studio established in 2014, committed to exploration of architecture that responds to the dynamic environment and time through research and practice. Our work includes site adaptable installation, connected pavilions, and a number of artworks for the public space and exhibitions, and also biennales. Most recent years, we've been developing pneumatic structures, and one of which has the negative air pressure isolation rooms for the COVID-19 patient. To us, architecture is not just about buildings, but also exhibitions, pavilions, urban research, and publications. It is pursuing any project that allows to unpack and actualize the boundless possibilities of the discipline for the better society. Well, before we jump in, we wanted to provide a little context about how the architecture scene in Korea has evolved over the past decade or so. In 2014, when the Korean Pavilion was awarded the Golden Lion Prize at the Venice Biennale Architecture, and in 2017, the first Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism started. And in 2025, we are preparing the National Museum of Architecture and Urbanism is set to open. With this ongoing expansion of architectural institutions and cultural platform in Korea, we've been able to challenge ourselves to ask new questions regarding our cities and architectures.
Now, I will introduce you two of the projects from our Tiki-Taka publication. The first one is called Docking City. So Docking City is a project based in Usadanro area, which is a vernacular residential area, the only stretch to survive the massive redevelopment along the Han River. During the 3 years of research, trekking up and down these steep hills, we noticed all kinds of weird personal vehicles were in use, which were in fact serving to connect buildings and residents in this neighborhood. So based on these observations, what we proposed was the 5GO system. First, we have the I-GO, a personal utility vehicle, which can be folded compactly. Then we have a WeGo, a container-sized station where it stores the I-GOs and can also be used as a waiting space for other transport systems like the buses or metros. Then an UpGo, which is a specially designed escalator better suited for sloped hills and stairs and can also accommodate the I-GOs in the escalating steps. Then which is connected to Vertigo, which is used to reach the underused upper floors of Main Street, increasing commercial activities, and a ramp called Dolbo. So what we proposed was, in a way, a flexible system or infrastructure of multiple scales and usages that can work with the existing urban conditions rather than a single best solution. This work re-examines a loose web of relationships and networks through a physical proposal and explores the viability of actually enacting such a solution. So what we've come up with was a phased development strategies that can actually work with the urban fabric. And for the project, we selected 5 sites, which has showed a certain characteristics that describe the site and suggested a range of programs, like a mosque that can be turned into weekend flea market for international residents, street to shop fronts, which can be extended to upper levels to create a mini shopping complex, an empty car park below housing units to provide a language center during the day. Or we also suggested rooftops of many empty houses that are currently in the site to be connected to provide community facilities like a sports center. So kind of utilizing the sloped hills of the natural landscape in this area, we have come up with a series of systems that can actually connect and they can work with the terrains. The next project I'll show you is the Looping City. It's a project in Ujiro, which is a city center of Seoul. The Ujiro area is a sprawling market complex with a mix of small-scale manufacturing industries, but is currently facing the demolition for new developments of offices and residential blocks. So this project imagines a new circular economy based on recycling networks using the byproducts from the electrical, lighting, metalworks, and printing shops in the area. Our future scenario has 3 components. First, Tubo, an autonomous robot which collects and sorts the byproducts into different materials that are disposed of during each stage of production. Then the Tubo station, where these robots are charged and stored, and send the collected materials through pneumatic tubes. And finally, a docking station, where these collected wastes are processed into raw materials for 3D printing, with the nearby new and upcoming designers that have recently moved into the area.
Look what I have found. This is leftover waste. It is not considered valuable. My name is Tubo, and I am a robot. I function as part of a recycling network. The makers send me signals, and I come to collect the waste. I scan, analyze, and sort it into the tubes. Finally, it's ready for send-off. The waste travels along the tube system to the docking station. At the docking station, the waste is reshuffled. A new recycling begins. Now here again, look what I have found. It is no longer waste, but new materials.
So this work imagines a new layer of infrastructure that can act as a circulatory system for the whole complex. This, we hope, will strengthen the self-sustainability of this manufacturing district, which comprises a varied network of productions, logistics, and distributions. Our question here was, how do we breathe new life into space while respecting the existing urban fabric? The proposer helped us imagine the possibilities inherent in forging connections between old and new, instead of simply replacing one with the other, a shift that can serve both the local community and industry.
So at this point, you might wonder why are architects making robots? We believe that stepping away from our own perspective to look through the eyes of Aigo and Tubo allowed us to rediscover boundaries and networks of relationships not visible on any human map. Be it the improvised fields throughout Usadanno or the industrial byproducts on the street of Ujiro, we delved into the traces, less obvious networks of movement, native to each area in order to catch possible applications for this dawning era of automated vehicles. Moreover, these are the architectural proposals that uncover the hidden value of existing industries and communities, which can actually act as a catalyst to foster much needed new perspective on the aging city. We believe in the importance of putting research into practice, that crucial step beyond observation and application. We seek to implement our findings back onto the site where it all started and intervene within the context of the real place and people. So this first station of Tiki-Taka has given us a chance to reconnect to the work of our contemporaries in architecture and design. We hope that many more teams and new faces will emerge through future editions of Tiki-Taka, especially those who explore architecture beyond buildings, creating interesting dialogues and expanding the architectural discourses. Thank you very much.
Great. This is fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing your super interesting work. I can also see, oops, and perfect timing as well. And I can see a different aspect of your work, even though we've met many times. So thank you to Jinhong and Yunhee. Our next presenter is Dongwoo Yim, the principal at PRAUD and assistant professor at Hongik University. So Dongwoo is he is the co-founder of PRAUD with Rafael Luna, and assistant professor at Hongik University's Graduate School of Architecture and Urban Design. He was an adjunct professor at RISD from 2011 to 2017, and a visiting assistant professor at Washington University in St. Louis in 2016. He received his Master of Architecture in Urban Design from Harvard University and his bachelor degree from Seoul National University. He co-curated the city's exhibition in 2019 version of Seoul Biennale with Rafael Luna, and Pyongyang Salim in 2017 with Calvin Chua. He's the winner of the Architectural League Prize in 2013, and he has participated in the Golden Lion Award, winning a Korean Pavilion in 2014 at the Venice Biennale, and he is the author of Pyongyang, Pyongyang After, Unprecedented Pyongyang, and I Want to Be Metropolitan, and many other publications, including the North Korean Atlas that I was part of in 2014. His title of the lecture is Accessories of Architecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dongsei, for a fantastic introduction, and thank you again for NYIT for hosting this wonderful event. I know that this is the end of the semester, so nobody wants to do anything more special, but thank you. So basically, even though I'm supposed to present my works, but I would like to briefly talk about this Tiki-Taka, even though we will have a discussion session. But basically, when we first kind of came up together in, I think it was October 2020, we're kind of architects who design the buildings the least, I think. But I think that was kind of the important thing because I'm not sure whether you're familiar with the Korean context, but in Korea, architects equals to designing or designers for the buildings. So all of us kind of agreed, or at least we had a consensus that we have to let's say push the boundaries of the architecture beyond what's being said or considered in Korean context. So that's how we kind of started. And as you have seen from other two presentations, these are more about observations of our built environment. And as a continuous effort to that, I'm going to present what my observations were about the built environment that we have. So basically, as most of you are also interested, and obviously architects of our previous generations, that what are the fundamentals in architecture, right? So that conversation has happened or has been started like for many centuries. But basically, based on this one little question, there have been so many reactions to that. So based on Vidler's essay, there are three different typologies. But basically, even that question was one of the main title, not one of the, actually the main title of the 2014 Biennale when Rem Koolhaas directed. And as you may know, that he was kind of closing the chapter of the previous 100 years of modernism. So basically, I think that was kind of the very important questions to address. What are the fundamentals? And he showed the exhibition called Elements of Architecture, saying that, oh, these are the 15 elements that compose architecture, and then the architecture has been evolved through the evolution of each element. So it was really interesting architecture. But when we bring that question to the city or the built environment in general, or the streetscape, what are the fundamentals? Keep on making a grammar error, but let's say, what are the fundamentals? So if you think about the streetscape in Venice, right? You can see all these elements like window, balconies, or chimneys, or fireplace, doors, those type of elements that were in the exhibition, right? But this is where I live. This is the streetscape of Seoul. Probably you have seen it, you have been it. This is not the only case in Seoul. I think many Asian cities also have similar kind of atmospheres. So here, it's kind of very hard to say what makes the streetscape. Of course, architects try to keep on arguing that those are, let's say, facade or windows or doors or balconies, those type of architectural elements make the cityscape, but in reality, it's kind of different. That's how I started to observe. So when we think about the Mr. Potato, it keeps on changing the figure or the look, right? But so there's an essence, like the Mr. Potato is still there, but based on what kind of accessories that they take, the look of it become different. So that's what I thought is interesting in this context of the city. So maybe there's something like a essential thing behind what we see, but at least the streetscapes are made by other things. And that's how I wanted to call accessories. So as opposed to elements, because it sounds like elements is kind of let's say, more architectural language, but accessories are kind of, it implies that it can always be taken off if needed. It can always be attached or detached when needed. So that kind of a temporal aspect of these elements were interesting. So I started to call it accessories. So basically, the book is about like archiving or documenting all these different types of accessories and naming them. Not sure whether you can imagine what this is, but basically this is a building in Seoul that is very Western type. I mean, sometimes some clients really like these type of fake Western type building. But anyway, so you may not know what that building is, but when you see the backside of it, this is the whole duct system that they have. So basically, this is a barbecue place. So they have all these exterior ducts that are climbing up the back wall. So which basically makes the building let's say, functionable for the barbecue place? Is it the front facade that they want to show, or is it the back facade? Another example is like this type of thing that traditional architecture, when many Korean architects are trying to, let's say, interpret these traditional elements to contemporary or modern style, they try to make a lot of effort. In the city, this is what's happening. Like, oh, I mean, I don't care. I'm just gonna bring all these elements and then make them as accessories, right? So I'm just gonna attach whatever those the tile roof elements to my restaurants, so that people know that my restaurant is more traditional restaurant type of thing. So it's kind of interesting, and then that also makes our city more kind of, in a way, dynamic. And then this is another example. Like this is where my office is located. It's called semi-industrial zone. So there are some attachment to very generic buildings that makes, or that let the building to be functionable for production or industries. So you may not see much difference between these buildings and other buildings, but when these accessories are attached, they function as factories. So because this is a semi-industrial zone, there are a lot of small factories around the area, and those accessories starts to make a kind of whole neighborhood scene. So the whole atmosphere of the neighborhood is somehow defined by these accessories. And obviously, because they're being let's say changed or gentrified, a lot of buildings are converted into other programs. A lot of factories are converted into other programs like cafe, something like this. So this building used to be a factory, but now it's a famous cafe. As you can see, the building is super generic. And so this is a moment that I was like, okay, well, then what do we do as an architect when we design building? What do we have to do? Because like even the most simple or the most generic building could be super adaptable to the use of the change, to the change of the city, or the change of the needs of the people, right? So so basically that's kind of the also kind of fundamental question that I had, or I shared with the other teams in this Tiki-Taka. Okay, so can the simple box be transformed into different functional buildings based on what accessories are attached, rather than the architectural design, or rather than changing the architectural design itself? So that's kind of the question that I wanted to raise. And this is a last slide that we diagrammed. So basically, this is what architects think that the city would look like. But basically, that's what the reality is. And then many architects think those red parts are kind of very messy and need to be cleaned up type of thing. But I think at the same time, that's the phenomenon that we have. So I think we should also learn how to engage those elements or those accessories to the architectural design. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for your great presentation. So our next presenter is Roon Kang. Everyone who has presented here is super special, but he's extra special because he makes us our conversation multidisciplinary. He's not an architect, but a designer, a very talented designer and professor. Roon Kang is assistant professor at the new school, Parsons School of Design, and he's also a principal of math practice. So he is a TED Senior Fellow and was previously a research fellow at Sensible City Lab at MIT, and is a recipient of the Young Guns Award from the Art Directors Club. His work has been selected as the inaugural project of LACMA's Art and Technology Lab, and was the winner of the NSF Science and Engineering Visualization Challenge, and his work has been shown in venues including MoMA, Seattle Public Library, Architectural League of New York. He has worked in partnership with a range of cultural institutions and events, including the Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism, Korean Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale, along with educational institutions and their research labs, including MIT Architecture, MIT International Design Center, MIT Media Lab, Yale School of Art, and Yale School of Medicine, and UCLA's Architecture and Urban Design Department. His presentation is titled "The Internet, Maps, Times, and Letters." Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for the introduction, and I really appreciate this opportunity to share my work and the thoughts that I have. I assume that the screen share is working. Do you see the screen? Is it working? Yes. Cool. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So as it was introduced, my name is Roon Kang. I run a design studio called Math Practice in New York. I'm currently in Honolulu because this is my sabbatical year from teaching, but I will be back in New York. And I also recently started a design research initiative or design consultancy called 908A, which I would like to talk a little bit about towards the end of the presentation. And yeah, I currently teach at Parsons as assistant professor of interaction design. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about my work in a way that's a bit different from kind of a typical show and tell manner. So less about what was made, what I made and how, but more kind of why, which I think is more relevant in the context of discussing Tiki-Taka as a project. This is actually my favorite way to start any talk. This is a work by a Dutch artist, Jeroen Kooijmans, which I came to know when I was doing my research for my thesis for my master's. In here, everyone's completely busy. Nothing really gets done. And I feel like running a design studio always felt like this. It's like, and I always wonder why we're doing this to each other to begin with, and kind of started to wonder like how I ended up in this loop. And when you think about it, you feel kind of hopeless in a way, because oftentimes you're just one person in this massive system, the global structure of financial incentives and infrastructure that kind of puts you in a position where you kind of wake up, open Gmail, sometimes do lecture via Zoom like today, or you go to work at 9 and like everyone else and come back at 6 and then kind of watch Netflix, you know, just like everyone else. And, you know, kind of like, I tend to wonder, why am I doing this and why everyone else is doing this with me? Like, why are we all doing this all at the same time? This is a wonderful documentary film by Alan Sekula and Noel Birch called Forgotten Space, that kind of looks at the behind the scenes life and culture of maritime transportation and the giant kind of the global logistical machine that it supports. And these kind of infrastructures are often hidden from the public eye, as you don't necessarily think about them when you buy stuff from Amazon. And I'm fascinated by these kind of under the hood structures that supports what's above the hood. And to create an analogy to kind of practice of design, I'm interested in the sort of the infrastructures that supports and sustains the contemporary practice of design, if you will. So much like this Korean photographer, Jo Chun-man, who's looking at the industrial kind of spectacles of mega factories and construction sites across Korea that are usually hidden from the public eyes. So in a sense, to identify these kind of inner workings of the infrastructure for creating designs, per se, and sort of to understand who made them and why and how, because someone had to invent them from the first place, right? To support this amazingly complicated world of kind of designed objects, whether it being kind of virtual or physical. So, and as a person designing things in this landscape, right? I'm kind of fascinated by how, the buy now button that you can see everywhere has become sort of a shortcut for all these kind of complexities. They are beautifully abstract and kind of at the same time kind of tragically symbolic, that it's so easy to click, designed with aims to be completely frictionless, that actually triggers a massive chain of reaction of events, right? A very complex logistical journey of objects from warehouse to warehouse, loading and unloading, and maybe the truck drivers moving around in the highways and their kind of visit to the rest areas and the people working in those rest areas and their paychecks, and so on. And sometimes we, often we just look at this system. This is sort of this rare moment that you see the glimpse of that massive kind of universe of events. Very dry presentation of actually, I think, very exciting and magical journey of this iPhone 5, particularly in this example that I ordered in 2013, that's being delivered to my studio in Manhattan from China within only 2 days, right? So it started from Zhangzhou in China, then stopped at Incheon, and then Anchorage, then to Louisville, Kentucky, then to New York within 2 days, right? So I feel like it's going to be a pretty sensational journey if you are doing this trip yourself as a human being. But these kind of trips are completely unnoticed as nothing special because it happens millions of times a day, right? Not many people really think about them. And I feel like the same happens in what we see and read every day, right? When we see the designed objects or designed experiences. What I do in my studio every day as a graphic design studio is to give form to some kind of idea or a set of edited text, if you will, and make that sort of consumable as a book or a website or on a phone or any kind of medium that is required. And if you look into things that I use every day to make that happen, on the surface, these are the tools that I use, right? And like pretty much everyone else uses. Adobe Creative Suite, right? Creative Cloud these days. Google Docs, Microsoft Word, Gmail, Slack, Notion, WordPress, Dropbox, Google Maps, Wikipedia, like all these tools and services that you use. And when you kind of like lift the hood of these things, many of these are made with the tools or technologies that are including these kind of things. I'm just starting from the web-based technologies, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Apache, kind of web servers, MySQL, JSON, Markdown, like all these kind of things. And these things are made possible with more kind of fundamental computational concepts, such as strings, numbers, Booleans, variables, loops, lists, objects, and so on. And then these core computational concepts are dependent on more fundamental kind of measuring units that we have, such as like GMT, metric systems, latitude and longitude, which all of these are human inventions when you think about it, right? Greenwich Mean Time is a human invention, like the shared time space that we all share is an invention, right? And the metric system is an invention. I was surprised that the Celsius and the Fahrenheit is the last names of people. So zooming zooming back out. If I look at the projects that I do in my studio, I like to think of them as sort of my way of exploring this universe of tools and inventions. And some of those tools are more contemporary than others. For example, like in one example that I like to bring up all the time is the what's called Knuth Plus algorithm. It's sort of the base, it's the algorithm that pretty much everyone uses, but no one really knows, takes attention, is sort of the basis for breaking paragraphs into lines of text, right? So that you use it in the Microsoft Word, you use it on the web browser, you use it in InDesign. But this is largely based on kind of paper published in 1981, whereas some of the tools I used for some of the websites here are still kind of in active development. So they're like still kind of relatively new in that sense. So yet kind of all in all, these are the human inventions that has its own history and kind of its own biases. And I'd like to think of my studio practice as a way to kind of navigate that landscape and hopefully kind of leaving notes as I go along. And as I do it, in some kind of rare cases, I run into situations that I can experiment with the way how I approach them. And I'd like to show just one recent project I did under the name of 908A, which is the research initiative and a design consultancy that I co-founded with my partner, Andrew Leclerc. So we call ourselves as a research initiative that focuses on constructing new design tools in partnership with cultural organizations, with aims to build an intellectual framework and a community around the practice of design as the shaping of instructions rather than the manual composition of surfaces, which is kind of like how people used to think of graphic design. And we got a small funding from the Knight Foundation through New Inc., the cultural incubator of the New Museum in New York, to kind of further develop this idea of separating knowledge creation and the design production, particularly in the museum space. And fast forward a couple of years, we're generalizing the sort of the research a bit beyond the museums. And one project that we have done recently is to design and publish a book, not using InDesign, but using HTML and CSS with a flat file CMS, content management systems like WordPress, but using a flat files and sort of a layout logic. So this is what you're seeing. This video is like the kind of the look into the system that we designed. So the entire book, the book is 400 pages long and is shown as a single web page. So you can scroll the entire book from top to bottom on a browser, which can then translate it into PDF like this using templates defined per content type with the raw data that's brought in as CSV and Markdown. So the kind of the nice advantage of this new workflow created by the new set of tools that we designed was that the entire book was able to be edited collaboratively, kind of the true sense that everyone involved in here, we were like 17 people who were working on this. Everyone was working concurrently, not like designers were waiting for kind of editors to finish their work and send the finished file over email as a Word document. So it was more when the content was ready, the book was ready kind of instantaneously. And this is the final printed book. And we have this little moment in the book that's kind of bragging about the generative, the data-driven aspect of the book. Some of the design elements are reflective of the technical structure of the content. So for example, in here, the rounded shapes reveal the sort of the nested HTML structure of the given content. And this kind of new design process really lends itself well to the kind of content that is really tedious to create using human hand, right? In this example, like this intricate collection of data. And also kind of the laying out the content that has a shared content structure, as the algorithm can kind of automatically create the layout as the content comes in. So, I mean, in some cases, this becomes really efficient in a way to create a publication. So coming to Tiki-Taka, I was trying to like keep the same spirit of challenging sort of the conventional tool ecosystem or challenging the norms of the tool ecosystem. So we kind of started out using Figma as a tool to collaboratively arrive at a content for the book, for the books, which in the end, after a few iterations, turned out to be, I mean, it was very helpful during the beginning of the process, but not so much as we're more in the phase of kind of solidifying each direction. So we ended up resorting back to InDesign, but instead of myself as a graphic designer in the team making design decisions for everyone else, we are kind of experimenting with a more kind of a soft system that I distributed to each one of us that defines the common building blocks of the book. So each author can construct their book using those elements. So we are kind of still in the process and we're kind of iterating over Zoom. And this is me giving feedback to everyone over Zoom recording a few weeks ago. And we are planning to finalize in the coming months. So stay tuned. And that is all for my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Mesmerizing presentation. So I think we have now exactly at 7 o'clock, we have up to an hour to have some discussions and some questions from the floor. So I think we'll have 1 or 2 main sort of questions for all of us. And then maybe we can collect some questions from the floor and the audience and respond to those questions. So the first question that I have for myself and others that we have here is to do with the motion picture or animation or the dynamic nature of images. All of you, except for myself, I mentioned it, but I didn't really show any particular clip or animation. But all of you have presented something that is dynamic or what we see as short video. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the role of dynamic medium, such as video, which has been with us for a long time, but how it might be changing that affects the way you practice or how you interact with others, whether it's clients or contractors. And if you can maybe expand on the nature of moving images or animations within your practice, that'll be appreciated. I think, Jeroen, you kind of already talked about it to a degree, so I wonder if you would like to start off that conversation.
Well, that's an interesting question. Like, I never really particularly thought about like videos as well. Let me actually think about it. I mean, I think videos are like naturally a really powerful tool. It puts a story in a 4-dimensional space, if you will, right? Like it puts a story in a time scale so that you can achieve a lot of like much more things than like say 2D space that's like a book. So that's very different kind of mode of communication, right? So I mean, one thing I'm trying to bring this question back to Tiki-Taka somehow. Many of the say, for example, the projects that PRAUD has been doing is shown. Many of them are shown in a sort of a moving image kind of format, and I guess the challenge that they have would be to translate that content into the book, and there are like obvious techniques to do that, and one of them being just like putting the thumbnails of a few moments and then call it a day. But at the same time, I think there are like pros and cons in there are like strengths in telling story in moving images, but like at the same time there are strengths in like showing still images in some cases. So definitely creates interesting challenges for them and to all of us. So I don't, at this point, I'm kind of like, I don't think I'm answering your question particularly, but I guess what I'm saying is that the moving images are strong and that's here to stay. I'm like more, I don't know. I tend to, I'm like very liberal in terms of like using moving images in presentations and stuff, because I think that creates kind of sort of an immersive experience that helps people focus more, especially when these like talks and lectures are delivered over Zoom, which is naturally kind of very non-inviting environment.
Great, thank you very much. So I guess, you know, I think Bahrain warrants sort of a response to that. So Yunhee and Jinhong, would you like to sort of not necessarily give us an answer, but kind of share some of the difficulty that you mentioned about having to translate some of your very productive, very effective images, videos, short clips that explain your projects into what we see as maybe more conventionally static medium, the book. If you can just comment on that, that would be appreciated.
I think when we started out, we didn't actually have much experience with videos or moving images. But I think the way we kind of came to use the videos was the fact that we did a lot of research. So we, you know, all these documentations and archives and research was really good for us internally to kind of building up our arguments and building our own narratives. But when kind of conveying this a lot of information to the audience, especially in exhibitions or in kind of competitions, we couldn't really, you know, we had to find a way of kind of compressing those data into a very effective form, and that's how we came to actually use the videos more and more. So for us, it's a tool to kind of telling a story by it's a tool for us to creating narratives that can engage with the people who are not necessarily architects or who don't necessarily have the same understanding of the regions as we do. But it's and also it's kind of really shaped the way we build up our projects as well. With these videos and these working prototypes, we almost make these future scenarios more viable. You know, so people can really imagine a different future than the present one that we face. But not just two architects kind of presenting their imaginations, but it's a very effective form of engaging with the audience to imagine for themselves what this new development or new alternatives way of thinking or imagining cities for themselves.
Yeah, and also through this kind of series of the practice of building up our stories out of kind of moving images, that also helped us to question ourselves and as an architect, and especially when you do design things, we normally do something very static and heavy, right, for the building, and we wonder whether can building can move, or can architecture can address the issue of this kind of lightness, which never really we kind of neglected to explore the past history of architecture. So maybe this is kind of the time, and then we can ask ourselves, and then maybe it's we talked about this kind of the AI and authorized vehicles and new technologies and metaverse, all those kind of new, never heard about was coming up for digital era. Maybe it's a good time to, start again and questioning what we believed.
Great, thank you. Dongwoo, would you, do you have something to add to the discussion on any moving images?
Yeah, I mean, we're not a firm who necessarily makes animations or movie clips often, not as much as PRAUD does, because I think the way how we design or analyze are a bit different. But even though I have put one or two in this presentation, but when Irwin was talking about how those let's say animated information could be translated into the published books or publications into publications, I think somehow that's what I think is that before books or the publications were the only medium that transcends or that kind of have all these informations in. But I think that those information is consumed different ways these days. So the books cannot be the only absolute Bible of the whole, let's say, information or knowledge. I think that has to be supported by other mediums like, let's say, YouTube videos or like Instagram, social medias, whatever those formats are. Maybe in metaverse, just as Jinhong briefly mentioned. So I think that the publications or the book format became, let's say, just one of many nowadays, rather than the absolute compared to the previous years. So that's something that we have to think about. So maybe we may not be able to translate all the videos to the publications, but we have to think about, okay, then what will be the effective way of having the let's say, for example, diagram in the publication, and then at the same time post something on the YouTube in different formats so that they can be supplement to each other.
Yes, on that, I was just recalling a course that I took when I was at GSD that was taught by Lars Mueller. I want to say it was called Architects as Editor. And I think the book, although it could be seen as archaic and old in a way, has a very powerful place in terms of organizing thoughts and presenting thoughts and refining thoughts. And I think that's one thing that I consciously kind of became a bit more aware through the conversations we've had, and to use the book as a medium to present some of the things that we're producing. So I just wanted to hear from all of our participants whether they had any other, separate from the discussion that we're having, other observations, questions that you would like to bring to the table at this moment. I think there is a hand up. Tom, would you like to join us in this conversation, the Tiki-Taka?
I'd just like to, well, thank you for all the pleasant presentations. They're really wonderful. I'd just like to piggyback this conversation on media. You're talking about various kinds of communication formats, the book, the videos. And I think the question of the media began, or this whole, why you all come together is this whole tiki-taki, these 30 conversations, which during the pandemic are more distant and socially remote forms of communication were so crucial for us to either remain, active and sane. And I think of my own either social groups, where we have a song of the day, and other sorts of architecture groups where we exchange what we're doing in the worst of the pandemic. And I think what you developed was something really interesting as a next generation of a platform, a kind of sharing platform for exchanging, but also accumulating knowledge. And I think it's quite unique and different than other sort of modes of communication that we might have seen before. But I think, you know, as some other observations, Yunhee's statement, how do you breathe life into space? And all of these conversations are happening when there's so little life going on in spaces. And all of your work in some ways is about activating the city, or the ways in which it adapts or changes. In Dongwoo Yim's last presentation about adaptivity through the accessorizing of spaces and such. But I do have a question about media, or the platform that you've worked together with or communicated with, this Tiki-Taka. In which ways do you think cities, actual spaces, and either cities as wholes or locales, have changed, whether they've benefited in the longer term or shorter term, through the distance, internationally, but also locally, various lockdowns? Here we are about a quarter through the 2020s, and we're on a kind of media platform, very ironically. And in which ways, what do you foresee or forecast as the impact of our distant media, our more mediated and distant forms of communication and exchange of knowledge upon the city, or about locales and cities? So it's a very, very broad question, but
yes, but an important one and an interesting one. Professor Yim, would you like to respond? Roon or Bahrain, Jinhong, Yunhee, any thoughts to that important question?
I mean, I think, thank you, Tom, for the great question. I think that, I mean, I'm not sure whether I have an answer to that, but I have kind of like a brief thoughts that I had in my mind in general during last, let's say, 2 years or more than 2 years now, which probably we all have similar kind of questions. So I think that this, let's say, over the last 2 years, I think this whole pandemic situation has changed in many ways. As Dongsei showed, the world has kind of shrunk dramatically. I mean, just as we do now, like we're not flying to New York anymore. We're just doing these events through Zoom, so it's kind of very easy. At the same time, in the physical cities, I think I can see things are very localized, because there's so many kind of unexpected occasions when you rely on the global commerce. Like Irun kind of mentioned that forgotten space, or the kind of whole infrastructure network that people don't really see. Those are kind of, I mean, I'm not sure whether I can say the breakdown of those infrastructure. I mean, it's still working, but things are, I think, because of the pandemic, more localized. Things are more reliable now. So I think they started to change the economies, or the minds of the people, or even architecture as well. So I think that's kind of interesting, that we are more like hyper connected to the global people. At the same time, the physical world is more kind of parcelized, I think, or segmented, to a certain size of units, I think. Or at least that's where we are gonna move forward. That's what I think in the future.
I think it's, sorry, Irun, please go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I mean, one just a thought that I was having as I was listening to the question was that, I mean, it just reminded me of like one of the projects that I have done like a few years back with LACMA, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, as their kind of art and technology lab project. It was, I mean, basically the project was in search of personalized time. And the question that we were asking ourselves was that, like, we were back then I was still working like remotely because I was doing a project in Korea where I was basically my personal life and my professional lives are happening in New York. So the sort of the meetings and like a lot of things were happening in a really odd hours, right? There's a 12-hour or 11-hour difference. So while I'm like enjoying like breakfast, lunch, and dinner with my wife, but at the same time, my meetings for this particular project was happening at like midnight, 2 a.m. And it was same for the counterparts in Korea, right? So we start as the project was going on for like 6 months or almost a year, we were kind of thinking about like, what time zone are we in? Because these meetings drag on like 2 hours, 3 hours. And we started to call that this time, that sort of the time that we agreed to meet. It's like maybe a separate time zone. It's like else when, if you will. It's like it doesn't exist in New York. It doesn't exist in Korea. It's like someplace else. And it's the time that we agreed to join and that we kind of sync up. So that's sort of the idea about like in search of personalized time as a project that I was collaborating with another Korean artist called Taeyeon Choi. And we were kind of like, can we create a system that like, can we create an alternative time system that we can kind of, instead of kind of like defining the time from the top down based on the planetary movement, can we agree on a time from the bottom up? So like I have my own time space and you have your own time space. Can we agree and create a time? And that's something that I was thinking about as I was listening to your question. Like, is that the same for the cities? Because we are 22 people in this Zoom space, if you will. So this is a city, if you will, like a rather small one. But this could be seen as sort of a temporal city that we agreed to participate and have conversation in. I don't know the implications of that in the future, but just something that I wanted to bring up.
I think there is, yeah, I mean, I think that's great observation. And there is a question from Professor Santa Maria. But before I just get to it, I just want to say that there is, going back to Tom's question, I think there is this extreme conditions on both ends that is expanding. And I think as an architect and an urbanist, the improvisation or the spontaneous nature of things or serendipity that you have in urban spaces. For example, let's say if this presentation was in person, we may end the presentation and we may go out somewhere and we may go to a very, let's say, reserved place that is scheduled. But then after that, things might have an open possibility, whereas the kind of events that we have now in this hyper-connected conditions may be too much curated in a way that is not affording us to have those improvisations to a degree. So I think there is an interesting kind of contrast or contradictory conditions, which I think we need to become much more aware of and have a kind of a mix or balance between those two to really get the best out of those tools or conditions that we encounter or are afforded to. So maybe we can go to our next question.
Can I add some? Can I also add some comments? Yeah, I think even though we are in a very hyper-connected world, in a very contradicting way, we become more aware of our physical boundaries and physical spaces, especially in the cities as well. In Korea, during the pandemic, like each cultural institution has a limit to how many people are allowed per square meters, for example. So even these kind of facilities or familiar spaces, you don't really get a sense of how big or how small the spaces are. But by having these kind of in these times of during these difficult times, I think we spend more time in an area where we are with a heightened sense of our own boundaries, and also personalized spaces as well. So in Korea, another phenomenon was that people were queuing up to go to like exhibitions or other activities that so people were queuing for hours outside exhibitions just to engage in a much more, I guess, in a different environment other than their homes. Or the schools were shut down, etc. So the only places people could go were, we don't really have that many parks or public spaces. So instead, people actually go to cafes or bakeries or these museums. They were in such boom, and it still continues today. So even though like this, even though we are kind of these technologies are developing to connect us better on the digital world, on the other hand, this physical atmospheres or the built environment has become, I guess, much more important, and much more people's awareness have increased in contrast.
Great, thank you very much. So Professor Giovanni Santamaria, would you like to join the conversation?
Yeah. It will be. What I found very interesting across this wonderful presentation tonight is this need that we all feel of exploring or finding new channel of communication. Cities are communicative, are means of communication. Territories are means of communication, and communication means also contrast and conflict that communication raises. Bodies are means of communication. Robotic bodies are means of communication, and we need this communication for perhaps the need of defining new vocabulary, new means of expression that are open, that are kind of adaptable, as Iran shows. And I like the quote. I would like to quote Iran saying, "Tragically symbolic." So what is then the value of a symbol when the symbol becomes an icon at a cultural level, at physical level, and when this vocabulary, new vocabulary that through that as accessories try to fight against the generic city, which is a model that the postmodern brought as iconic, as the avant-garde, right? Now we are the post-avant-garde, when we are kind of trying to find the root of the generic places or the generic city in something that has a kind of a cultural attribution. So how do you see the shift from this symbolic to the iconic, when everything we communicate through icons? I mean, the buy now, that's an icon, that's not a symbol, but how do you see this this journey proceeding, and how do you live in this dichotomy between a communication that is symbolic and iconic?
Great question. While we think about the great question, we'll wait for others to respond to that great question. We have Professor Bren's hands up. Would you like to join us?
Sure, thank you for a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it. I think that one of the things that, as you were presenting, I think it was Bear, when you guys were presenting this idea of what does it mean to be an architect, and how is different depending on where we're coming from. I come from the Dominican Republic, and when I say that I'm an architect there, it's very different than when I say that I'm an architect in the United States. And so when this was brought up in this presentation, it really spoke to me, because I live in that kind of definition. And so what I think that is really interesting about all the presenters today is how you're questioning the role of architect, you're questioning the tools that we use for those that we use as architects, and you're questioning the outcomes that we produce as architects. And for me, that wonderful connection between all of those, let's say, points or process as we operate really becomes a way in which we can show our diversity and our connectivity as well. So I was wondering if you could speak about your process behind the way that you think about and in different ways that you kind of express your role as a professional or as an architect or as a designer, and how do you think about those things?
Great, thank you very much for a very important question as well. Dongwoo, Bahrain, Roon, I'm sure you have thoughts on that, but
I think I can address to Professor Brand's question first. I think that that question was the fundamental question that we had when we first got together. And if I may I share the screen? So basically, this is the kind of the statement that we just drafted, never officially announced, but I think this might help to understand what we were thinking. Like, most often the practice of architecture is limited as to making buildings. However, architects tell their unique stories in multiple ways. I think the stories are very important. I like the term stories because it doesn't sound like architecture. They write, curate exhibitions, and conduct a wide range of research. Moreover, architects also design and make new products. We can consider all of these activities as architectural acts. Tiki-Taka focuses on architects' diverse methods and processes beyond the making of buildings. So also the diverse method and processes are also important, I think, because I think as mentioned, that mostly architects are architects are somehow judged by the result or the outcomes of what they have. But basically, if we start sharing the processes of our thoughts, I think that's basically how we make the architecture more wide. And also, we're all educators as well, so we also think about how our students could broaden their eyes through these efforts that we're trying to make, and share the processes of our, so basically sharing our thought processes rather than just showing the outcomes. So it further focuses on engaging the public through exploring architects' thinking, projects and processes beyond critiquing architecture. Moreover, Tiki-Taka aims to produce and expand architectural discussions by collaborating and interacting with a wide range of disciplines. So that's somewhat what we've been trying to do through this project. I mean, we don't have the publications yet. I hope we did, but I wish we did. But basically, just as I said, so this is not a single publication that, let's say, Bahrain just wants to have their own publication and PRAUD wants to have our own publication type of thing. But I think it's a series of effort or group of effort to raise a voice in this scene, so that people, especially students or young architects, start to understand that, oh yeah, actually these are the stories that they are making. Oh, actually these are the kind of the actions or activities that are being happened or that are happening at the moment in the architecture, and that's how we call architecture as well. And personally, I mean, my students call it, how to call it? It's called talgon in Korean. It basically the meaning is how to say exodus from architecture, or basically escaping from architecture. That's kind of what students always use that term, saying that, oh, I'm not going to do architecture anymore. As soon as I graduate, I'm going to quit the architecture type of thing. But when I make conversations with them, I realize that when they say architecture, it's basically designing a building. They don't want to be in a building design process, because it's hard, whatever. But what I say is that, oh no, but architecture, there's so many other things than you think. So that's another thing that we are trying to show this through this project.
Thank you. You showed beautiful in your presentation and also in your answer, and thank you for expanding on that aspect and including also the students in that discussion, because I think mainly for them this is very important. Perhaps if we continue with the kind of all ideas of, you know, what architects are, then it will be pretty difficult for us to move forward as a society. So these roles need to be expanded on, and who better to understand that. It's not that we have the answer on which way they should expand, but at least to pose the question that, you know, this is important, and that architects can no longer have a role that is kind of framed and defined and kind of boxed in one condition, but rather expanding those ideas into other aspects, and their impacts can be really, really great. And so I thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
I want to speak a little bit about in response to Giovanni's a question regarding this kind of the new way of communication, also kind of the symbolic, the icons, and then post avant-garde, those kind of the story of the architecture history, what we went through. I guess what's interesting in our observation in current urban condition is that, you know, like 100 years ago, like we had a language, like we had a long language, the architecture history, which called ornament, and then suddenly the modernism made as a crime, like Alp Loos said, and then I think after that period, we built up certain language, like accessories Dongwoo was observing. And even though we have what is mere skeletons, but also people start adding on their desires and adding on their needs and goods and something for necessary things to communicate their wills with others. I think we are starting to catch up the history of our lost language, and then and trying to make to communicate with the society as an architect, as a profession. So maybe this kind of the very early starting up the image of the presentation from 2014's Rankura's The Fundamental of Architecture. This kind of the alarming sign for us to start look ourselves more a scholarly way, rather than to make a better detail of joint of buildings. Maybe we done enough for last 100 years or so. And also responding to Trudy, very appreciate your empathy on our presentation. I think we also have this kind of a gap between our lives. We both of us educated in London, in the UK, and professionally trained and abroad. And when we come back to Korea, there's a certain gap. The Korean architects are trying to make a good quality of building because the Korean War in 1950, it was kind of the booming era for building, for make a society to accommodate all these kind of people to make them happier. This is kind of the kind of the game of a number, game of the land, not so much about the quality of the building. So that was kind of the main task for Korean society in general. It's time to focus on to make up a good quality of building and meaningful buildings. And then I thought maybe for us in our generation, maybe we need to look other aspect of architecture and then tell the story with the society, something we can do other things apart from good quality of building. I think this is kind of the study of the generations. Maybe some younger our students might think differently. Maybe they disagree what we are saying now. So, but this is kind of our expectation, what Tiki-Taka could evolve over the time with other generations. So this is our just the first starting kickoff sign of the vibrant activities and energies is going on in Korea society. And we also are more than welcome the practitioners and academics and from around the world to join us coming years. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. So talking about next generation and students, I also just want to make note of the two students who have helped me do a lot of the drawings in the presentation that I gave you today. I think there is Elise Park here and Julia Andor as well joining us in the crowd. So thank you very much for the great work that you've done for the publication. And it'll be great to see what architects can do that is beyond just building buildings. And maybe it gives a glimpse of hope, as Bare mentioned, for the next generation of the expanded role of architecture and architects. So I think there are a couple of questions in the chat and maybe we can get to them. One of the question was from Vanessa. The question is about the research, and it's the maps that I have created. Have you found the places, the place names in index and mapped have changed or begun to disappear over time? Also, I'm curious to know if your perception of the map as static drawing or dynamic has changed. To answer that question, first of all, a lot of the indexed names of places, villages have unfortunately disappeared. Some of the names have remained, and some of the villages or people who used to live there were relocated and the name were taken with them. So the villages that used to be in the DMZ that was evacuated have moved out to outside the DMZ and either onto north or south. Some have completely disappeared. Some have changed their names, but predominantly they have disappeared. The map that you saw were a preliminary map, and I'm doing more research on what really happened to some of those towns and where people moved, how they were moved out. So that's another sort of bigger sort of mapping project in process. In terms of the drawing of the dynamic nature of the maps, I think we had this kind of discussion in relation to the moving images, but I think fundamentally I personally believe that we need to fundamentally understand maps as a frozen moment that is in the context of transformation, evolution, and change. And if we can think about that in that context and understand it within the flow of, I guess, time and history in a larger contextual sense, I think it's always productive. So there is a question about where is there anywhere I can go to see the work, maybe a website or archive. And I couldn't make it on time. Yes, the publication will be obviously published in physical form shortly. So when that happens, we'll obviously let you know. And you can also go back to the presentation today. It will be posted on our website and YouTube. So you can do that as well. So are there any other questions, comments from our participants or our guests, audience?
I don't say, just not a question, just comments. Thank you very much. The presentation was really exciting. I think it was very inspiring and also very enriching, culturally enriching. And yes, I would like to, maybe we will have time to hear a little bit more, especially about the EM zone. It was particularly interesting for me. My comment is that just recently, sorry if it's a little bit of topic comment, but intriguing enough for me, I'm a little bit nerdish, is the fact that I don't know if you have seen the HBO new series about the demilitarized zone happening in New York. It's a dystopian series about future, and the presentation you gave us, it's particularly interesting regarding these aspects, in the fact that reality is more complex and maybe sometimes more dystopian than the science fiction that we see movies. So I think that, I don't know, this is a just by side reflection that was coming to my mind while I was listening, that was more interesting than a science fiction contemporary movie. So thank you very much for what you have done, and yes, looking forward to hear more about the next step of publication and your researches.
Great, thank you very much for your observation. And I think Roon mentioned it, his curiosity related to, you know, why things may happen. And I think one thing that all of us who presented today share is the curiosity of why things are the way they are, that fundamentally allows us to reimagine a different kind of future and alternative that might be more better just for us and also the next generation. I think fundamentally, our work and value is related to that. So I think on that note, I think we can end our great conversation, the Tiki-Taka here today, as part of the lecture and event series in spring. And I would like to really thank the participants for making the time early in the morning, afternoon, in different time zones, and also the students and faculty who have joined us during this very, very busy time. And hopefully all of you can all join us again in our future events as well. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a great evening, afternoon, and mornings, wherever you are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.